This is In Character. I'm your host, Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation.
My name is Katherine Bassett, and I'm delighted to be sitting in tonight for Gerard Robinson, who is the Vice President of Education at the Foundation. And it is truly an honor for me to be here with one of my edu-heroes, Chris Holmes. And we're just going to have a brief conversation about what Chris has experienced in terms of his teaching and learning about the topic of resilience. So Chris, welcome. So glad to have you here this evening.
Thank you. It is a privilege to be with you.
And I'm just going to start by asking, who's Chris?
Wow, I think Chris is still trying to figure that out. I think maybe we all are, or maybe we all should be. Along with students, I think that's the whole journey, is to try to figure out who we are, what meaning we have in life, and how we're supposed to fit into this world. And I still go through that journey in teaching. Teaching actually allows me a great opportunity to do that. So that's who I am. I'm kind of still figuring it out. I think I have a pretty good idea at this point. I'm a teacher. I mean, at the heart of it, that's who I am. I don't look at it as a profession, even though I know it is. It's just how I was made and what I love to do.
And Chris, I know that you've done a lot of different kinds of teaching throughout your career. You've served in a number of different teaching roles. So tonight we're focusing on resilience. Can you talk a little bit about some of those roles and how resilience fit into them and what you learned about resilience from your students and yourself along the way?
I love that question, Catherine, because I think oftentimes when we think of resilience, we think of so-called at-risk kids, people who lack resilience to the point of it being debilitative or causing serious problems in their lives, which is true. But resilience and lack of resilience affects everyone in lots of different ways. And so my experience began after college as a young teacher, teaching in a very affluent suburban school, where almost everyone went to college. In fact, I'd say more than half probably earned advanced degrees, but yet a different kind of lack of resilience existed there. And then I taught at another suburban school that was very different and very, I would say, middle class to impoverished area. And, you know, resilience looked very different for these kids, many of them, in regard to. So the question, say, at the first school was resilience had more to do with academics. And in the second school, it had more to do with survival. It had more to do with, you know, Holmes, I'm not really that interested in the academics. I'm just trying to get by. And I'll do what I can, and I apologize, but I'm just trying to make it. This was a really different approach to resilience. I also had the opportunity to teach at a gifted academy in the summer, which I still teach at. And you'd think gifted kids, okay, well, school is easy. Resilience doesn't really affect them. Absolutely, it affects them. The pressure that many gifted kids put on themselves and that society puts on them creates all kinds of problems with resilience. And then finally, 4 years ago, I left public education for a brief time to create a new high school, private school for kids who learn differently. These are kids of average to above average cognitive ability, but yet who didn't fit in or didn't mesh with traditional education. And so you can imagine as a kid hating school, what resilience was like for them. So you're right, a really broad mix of different types of kids and different types of schools that gave me a really broad perspective of what resilience is to humans.
Awesome, thank you. What did you learn about your own resilience throughout these different jobs, throughout these different settings?
I learned that I had to rely on people. As a young teacher, and I left teaching after 5 years. I left because I didn't think I was good enough. I lacked resilience to push through, and I was out of education for 11 years before I found my way back to my love. And figured some things out in the meantime, but I didn't rely on people. I thought I had to do it myself. If I couldn't figure it out, then I wasn't good enough. And so what I've learned about my own resilience is that it's okay. It's not a sign of weakness to reach out to people for advice, for guidance, for support. And that is how I get through. And to this day, that is how I thrive and survive, is by relying on a group of other people.
That's a lesson that we could all learn from, certainly, particularly, I think, in these times. So I'm going to switch gears for a minute. I know that last summer you undertook a really interesting journey, and that journey took you to many places, and I know that you're writing about it, and that eventually that journey will find its way into a book that I can't wait to read. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what that journey was, why you took it, and what you learned.
Yeah, I'll summarize it best that I can, because it evolved over time. And so I'll just try to cut to the chase. There was a moment in my teaching where I had an assignment, and a lot of the kids didn't do the assignment that particular day, and it was out of character for them. It wasn't, a typical thing. And I was confused. So I went back the next day. I think as a teacher, your initial reaction is to be frustrated with the kids. Oh my gosh, how dare you not do my assignment? But I thought that's not going to be a very effective approach. So I went in the next day and I arranged the chairs in a circle, and I asked the kids, what's going on? Why did this happen? Tell me what's going on. I'm not mad, just talk to me. I'm listening. And they broke down, and many of them cried, and they told me about what it's like for them to be an adolescent these days. Various stories. They weren't all the same, but they all had struggles that got in the way of what they wanted to do, was to be a good student. But there was a lot going on. And so I realized when I got home that night, I've got to approach my job differently. It's not so much about being this dynamic, wonderful journalism teacher who can, teach them the beauty of journalism, as much as it is, how do I get down to the core of intrinsic motivation? How do I get them to autonomous motivation, where they want to do something because they want to, not because they like the teacher, because their parents want them to, but because they want to. And so I went back to school. I went to grad school. I started studying educational psychology and started interviewing kids. I thought the only way I could really know was to talk to the kids, go to the source. So I started interviewing, just informally, teenagers. And then I got this idea, well, what if I actually went around the country and started interviewing teenagers? Is it different in different parts of the country? So last summer, I went to 48 states. I think I covered over 17,000 miles, and I interviewed several hundred teenagers and adults about motivation, about apathy, about school, why they have motivation, why they lack it, and kind of coded it and went through it and sorted it out and came up with some pretty interesting information by the time I got back home.
And reading your stories along the way was just a gift. The fact that you were able to post some of them for us on Facebook so that we could kind of follow your journey, it was a tremendous gift. What is one of the greatest takeaways for you from that trip?
Wow, so many. I'll give you two. One is that by far, the one question I asked everyone, whether they were teenagers or adults, was, what's the most important thing you should learn in high school? Of your high school experience, what is the most important thing a teenager should learn? And very few gave responses that were academic. Not that they didn't appreciate academics, and that's important that people understand that. They all valued the academics, but at the same time, they said that there are other things that have to be involved in that educational experience for a teenager. And really the main one was this search for self. Who am I? And not this frou-frou thing. They're like, this is serious. And adults said the same thing. I talked to 30-year-olds and 50-year-olds and 70-year-olds, and they said that, this was something really lacking in their lives, and it caused them serious problems well into adulthood, not just as teenagers. So this was one of the epiphanies that I had, is that people wanted some opportunity, some guidance to figure out some meaning about who they were and where they fit into the world. The other thing was, and this was the really sad thing, the teenagers that had rough stories, they didn't affect me as much emotionally, because they they had a hope that the older people I talked to didn't have. I talked to many adults, a waitress or a fisherman in Mississippi, a waitress in Georgia, a man on a beach in California, who were grown adults who were sad. They were in a bad spot and lost, and the teenagers didn't have that yet. And I got to thinking, well, what can education do? Should education address this? Are we missing something, some skill sets or some nourishment that humans need during adolescence that helps them survive after they get out of school? I don't think that education should stop at 12th grade as far as, preparing kids. They don't graduate high school and we're like, okay, we did it. We got them there. Now they're ready for adult life. We aren't. I don't think any of us are. So what is it that high school can do that better prepares holistically a human being for the realities of life, in addition to the academics, which is still important? Those were the two big takeaways I got, I think.
Those are two huge takeaways. We're almost at the end of our time. Do you have any final thoughts on the role of the educator in building a culture of resilience in school that you'd like to share?
The one thing I would like to share is that I wish there was more research. I wish there was more opportunity for research of resilience in high schools. Just resilience in and of itself is complicated. It's really hard to research. We have social and emotional learning and character development, and there's a lot of really wide, in-depth body of research about those things. But resilience is tricky, and maybe that's why there's such a lack of research, especially in secondary schools. But there needs to be, and I believe there could be, and I would love to be involved in that. Hopefully, that happens. But I would say we need more what works, empirically sound best practices about resilience in regard to teenagers.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you've shared tonight. I personally can't wait for your book to come out. Just following your journey as you took it was amazing, and I can't wait to read what you find.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of In Character, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight.